The crystal spires of New Zalara glowed with a soft blue light as they had for 3,000 years. But today that light flickered with fear. High above the planet, dark shapes moved between the stars like hungry shadows. Captain Veltar pressed his six-fingered hands against the cold viewing window of the orbital defense station. His large eyes, adapted for the gentle light of their twin suns, could barely make out the enemy ships in the darkness of space. They were wrong. Everything about them was wrong. The Void Swarm had appeared without warning 3 days ago. Their ships looked like living things, black and twisted with surfaces that seemed to breathe. They consumed everything in their path. Metal, rock, energy, even the light itself seemed to dim around them. "Sir, the outer colonies have gone dark," reported his aide, Nixara. Her voice trembled despite her training. "Keltor Prime, the mining stations on Vexmol, even the research facility on the far moon. All gone." Veltar nodded grimly. He had watched the recordings. The Void Swarm ships would arrive at a planet and then the world would simply disappear. Not destroyed, consumed. Eaten by creatures that turned matter into more of themselves. "How long before they reach the homeworld?" he asked. "At their current speed, 18 hours, she replied. 18 hours. The Zalani had been a peaceful species for millennia. Their greatest military achievement was a police force that rarely needed to do more than break up arguments over trade routes. Their ships were beautiful works of art, designed to explore and create, not fight and destroy. The enemy had weapons they could not understand and armor their energy beams could barely scratch. Worse, every ship they destroyed seemed to feed the others, making them stronger. "Sir," Nixara said quietly, "Admiral Kethron is requesting all defense coordinators join an emergency council." Veltar left his post and traveled to the main command center. The great chamber was filled with the soft chiming of Zalani voices, but underneath it was a current of panic. Admiral Kethron stood at the center, her normally pristine white robes now wrinkled from days without rest. "My friends," she began, her voice carrying across the chamber, "we face extinction. Our fleets are broken. Our weapons are useless. We have perhaps one day before the swarm reaches our homeworld." Murmurs of despair rippled through the gathered officers. Some wept openly, their tears falling like small diamonds in the low gravity. "However," the Admiral continued, raising her voice, "our exploration teams have made a discovery. Deep in the ruins of the Katani homeworld, they found something. A device, a beacon." She activated a holographic display. The image showed an ancient chamber, its walls covered in writing that hurt to look at. In the center sat a dark metal object, roughly spherical, covered in symbols that seemed to move when viewed directly. "The Ketani were warriors," Admiral Kethron explained. "They fought wars across the galaxy before our civilization even learned to speak. This device, according to the translations we could manage, is called a Guardian Beacon. When activated, it sends a call across the void to summon protectors in times of great need." "But Admiral," said Captain Morvan from the Engineering Corps, "the Katani have been dead for 50,000 years. Who would answer such a call?" "We don't know," she admitted. "But what choice do we have? The beacon promises that help will come, that guardians will answer the call of those who face extinction." The chamber fell silent except for the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Outside, another flash of light marked the death of another outer defense platform. "I volunteer to activate it," said Veltar, surprising himself with his own words. "If there's even a chance," Admiral Kethron nodded slowly. "The science team believes the beacon will reach across the galaxy, possibly beyond. Whoever built it had technology far beyond our understanding. If there are guardians out there, they will hear us." 3 hours later, Veltar found himself in a small scout ship approaching the dead world of Katara. The planet's surface was scarred and blackened, marked by ancient wars. His ship's instruments screamed warnings about radiation and unstable matter, but he pressed on. The ruins appeared on his scanner as geometric impossibilities, structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. He landed his ship as close as he dared and put on his environmental suit. Walking through the Ketani ruins was like moving through a nightmare made of stone and metal. The walls were covered in weapon scars from wars so ancient that the rock itself had forgotten the violence. But somehow the beacon chamber had survived intact. The device sat where the exploration team had found it, dark and patient. As Veltar approached, symbols on its surface began to glow with a sickly green light. Instructions appeared in his mind, not heard but understood directly. The beacon required a sacrifice of sorts. Not life but purpose. It would take his intentions, his people's need, and broadcast them across the cosmos. But it would also take something from him, his hope, perhaps, or his innocence. The price of calling for help from the dark between stars. Veltar placed his hands on the device. It was warm, almost alive. The symbols flared brighter, and suddenly he was connected to something vast and old and angry. The beacon had been waiting, he realized, waiting for someone desperate enough to pay its price. The device began to sing, a sound that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his bones. Power flowed through it, power drawn from sources he couldn't identify. The chamber around him lit up with displays showing star maps of impossible scope. The signal was traveling, piercing through normal space and into realms where physics worked differently. But something was wrong. The symbols on the beacon were changing, shifting into new patterns. This wasn't a call for peaceful guardians. The more he understood, the more afraid he became. The beacon was sending a military distress signal, a call for warriors, for soldiers, for those who solved problems with violence. He tried to stop it, but his hand seemed fused to the device. The signal continued to travel, racing across galaxies at speeds that made light crawl. It passed through peaceful systems where advanced civilizations lived in harmony. It ignored the gentle telepaths of the Miran Collective and the wise energy beings of the Astral Confluence. Instead, it sought something specific, something dangerous. The signal dove through dimensional barriers, reaching toward a small spiral galaxy where evolution had taken a different path, where life had learned to survive not through cooperation but through conflict. Finally, after what felt like hours but had been only minutes, the beacon released him. Veltar stumbled backward, his suit's medical systems flashing warnings about his elevated stress levels. The device was cooling now, its surface returning to dull metal. But the damage was done. Somewhere across the cosmos, someone had heard their call. Someone was coming. As he returned to his ship, Veltar couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. The beacon had promised guardians, but the images that had flashed through his mind during the connection were of ships like moving fortresses and beings that breathed violence like air. But it was too late now. The signal was sent, racing toward a distant world where the dominant species had crawled up from the primordial ooze by killing everything that stood in their way. A world where survival meant becoming the most dangerous thing in your environment. The Zilani had asked for help. What they were about to receive was something far more dangerous than anything they could have imagined. Help was coming. But help, Veltar realized too late, came in many forms, and sometimes the cure was worse than the disease. The signal from the Katani beacon traveled through space and time, bouncing off quantum barriers and diving through dimensional folds. It raced past civilizations that had transcended physical form, ignored species that had evolved beyond the need for conflict, and finally struck a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in the outer rim of a spiral galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chen was drinking her morning coffee when the alert came through. The hot liquid burned her tongue as alarms began blaring throughout Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega-7, hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. "Ma'am," called Sergeant Rodriguez from his station. "We're getting something weird. Really weird." Sarah set down her mug and walked over to the communications array. The screen showed wave patterns unlike anything in their databases. The signal was clearly artificial, but it was coming from beyond their galaxy. "How far beyond?" she asked. "Computer estimates. Roughly 12 million light-years, ma'am. Give or take a few 100,000. Sarah felt her eyebrows rise. "That's impossible. Nothing travels faster than light except for our quantum communicators, and they only work within the solar system." "Yes, ma'am. But this signal got here somehow, and it's still transmitting." She studied the displays. The signal was complex, layered with what looked like multiple languages and data streams. But underneath all the complexity was something simple, a mathematical sequence that every intelligent species would recognize. "Prime numbers. Get me the translation department," she ordered. "And wake up Dr. Martinez. Tell him we need the xenolinguistics team online in 30 minutes. Already on it. Ma'am." An hour later, Sarah stood in a secure briefing room deep inside Luna Base. The moon's low gravity made her feel lighter, but the weight of what they had discovered pressed down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Dr. Elena Martinez, Earth's leading expert in theoretical alien communication, looked exhausted. Her gray hair was messy, and she still wore her pajamas under her lab coat. "It's a distress call," Dr. Martinez said without preamble. "No doubt about it. The mathematical structures are clear. This is a request for military assistance." "Military?" asked General Thompson, Earth Defense Command's top brass. "Are you sure?" "Positive. The signal uses military protocols that match theoretical frameworks we developed for interstellar warfare. Whoever sent this is facing an existential threat and wants soldiers, not diplomats." Sarah leaned back in her chair. Humanity had been alone in the universe for all of recorded history. Despite centuries of searching, they had found no signs of intelligent life. Earth's radio signals had been broadcasting into space for over 200 years without a single response. "Where exactly did this come from?" she asked. "The Andromeda Galaxy," Dr. Martinez replied. "The signal traveled through something we don't understand. It shouldn't have been possible for it to reach us." "But it did reach us," General Thompson pointed out. "Which means whoever sent it has technology far beyond ours." Sarah nodded. Earth had only recently developed faster-than-light travel, and their ships could barely manage short jumps within the solar system. A civilization that could send messages between galaxies had to be incredibly advanced. "What do we know about the situation?" she asked. Dr. Martinez pulled up a holographic display. "Based on the signal analysis, they're facing an enemy that consumes planets. The distress call includes tactical data, energy signatures, movement patterns, weapons capabilities. This isn't a political conflict or a civil war. This is an extinction event, and they want military help," General Thompson mused. "Not scientific assistance or diplomatic intervention. They want someone to come in and fight." Sarah studied the data streams flowing across the display. The numbers were staggering. Entire star systems going dark. Fleets of ships disappearing without a trace. Whatever was happening in that distant galaxy, it was happening fast. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked. "The signal is degrading," Dr. Martinez explained. "The quantum effects that let it reach us are breaking down. If we're going to respond, we need to do it within the next 6 hours. 6 hours to decide whether humanity would answer an alien distress call. 6 hours to determine if Earth would send its military forces to a galaxy they had never seen to fight an enemy they didn't understand." "What kind of response could we mount?" General Thompson asked. Sarah had been thinking about that since the first translation came through. Task Force Cerberus is currently in the outer system conducting training exercises. 12 dreadnought carriers, 40 destroyers, and full marine complement. About 50,000 personnel total. "That's a significant force," the general noted. "For us," Sarah agreed. "But we have no idea what qualifies as a significant force for a galactic civilization. This could be like sending a rowboat to stop a hurricane." Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. "Admiral, there's something else. The signal includes coordinates. They're not just asking for help. They're telling us exactly where to go." The coordinates appeared on the display, translated into Earth's stellar navigation system. The target was a star system in what humans called the Andromeda Galaxy, roughly 12 million light-years from Earth. "Can our ships even make that journey?" General Thompson asked. "The new quantum jump drives have a theoretical maximum range that could get us there," Sarah replied. "But it would be a one-way trip. We don't have the fuel reserves for a return journey." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Any force they sent would be committed completely. There would be no retreat, no calling for backup, no coming home unless they could somehow refuel from alien sources. "There's another consideration," Dr. Martinez added quietly. "The signal was sent using military protocols, but we don't know what those protocols actually mean to the senders. Our interpretation might be completely wrong." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "What if their idea of military assistance is different from ours? What if they're expecting something we can't provide? What if—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What if they're not the good guys?" It was a sobering thought. Humanity was preparing to travel to another galaxy based on a distress call they barely understood. From aliens they had never met, to fight an enemy they knew nothing about. But the alternative was to ignore the call, to let an entire civilization face extinction while Earth did nothing. "I need to make a recommendation to the World Council," General Thompson said. "Admiral, what's your assessment?" Sarah looked at the data one more time. The energy signatures, the tactical information, the sheer scope of the destruction described in the alien signal. Whatever was happening in that distant galaxy was beyond anything humanity had ever faced. Sir, this is clearly a military situation requiring immediate intervention. The aliens have specifically requested armed assistance against what appears to be an extinction-level threat. Task Force Cerberus is equipped and ready for rapid deployment. And the risks? Significant, Sarah admitted. We'd be going in blind against an unknown enemy with no backup and no way home. But sir, this might be humanity's chance to prove we're ready to take our place in the galactic community. What Sarah didn't say was that she had already made up her mind. The signal spoke to something deep in human nature, the drive to fight, to protect, to charge toward danger when others were in need. Humanity had evolved as warriors, and every instinct she possessed was telling her to answer this call. General Thompson nodded slowly. I'll present your recommendation to the Council. If they approve, how soon could Task Force Cerberus be ready to depart? We could launch within 12 hours of receiving authorization, sir. Then let's hope we're making the right choice. As the meeting broke up, Sarah remained behind to study the alien coordinates. Somewhere in another galaxy, an unknown species was fighting for its survival. They had reached across the void between galaxies to ask for help. Humanity was about to answer that call. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that neither side truly understood what they were asking for. The human fleet materialized in Zilani space like a metallic storm. 12 massive dreadnought carriers led the formation, each one larger than anything the Zilani had ever built. Behind them came 40 destroyers, their hulls bristling with weapons that looked crude but dangerous. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, watching the alien star system spread out before them on the main display. 2 suns burned bright yellow, and several planets orbited in the habitable zone. It should have been beautiful, but the scene was wrong. Space debris floated everywhere, the remains of ships and stations torn apart by some terrible force. Ma'am, reported Commander Hayes from the sensor station, I'm detecting 2 distinct fleets in the system. One appears to be defending the 3rd planet. The other, he paused, checking his readings. The other is attacking everything in sight. Sarah nodded grimly. They had arrived in the middle of a battle. The distress signal had been accurate. Someone was facing extinction. Show me the defending fleet, she ordered. The main screen focused on a group of ships orbiting the blue-green planet. Sarah blinked in surprise. The vessels looked like works of art, graceful curves of crystal and metal that seemed to catch and reflect the light of the twin suns. They were beautiful, but clearly not military vessels. Those are civilian ships, observed Lieutenant Park from the tactical station. Look at the hull configurations. No armor plating, minimal weapons. They're trying to fight with exploration vessels. And the attackers? The display shifted to show the enemy fleet. These ships were wrong in every way that mattered. Black and twisted, they moved through space like living things. Their hulls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that made Sarah's skin crawl. Biomechanical, she said quietly. They've weaponized living tissue. As the human fleet watched, one of the enemy ships extended what looked like feeding tubes toward a broken space station. The station's metal hull began to dissolve, flowing into the attacking vessel like liquid. The ship grew visibly larger as it consumed the station. Jesus, whispered Commander Hayes. They're eating everything. Before Sarah could respond, her communications officer spoke up. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the crystal ships. It's in English. English? How is that possible? Unknown, ma'am. The signal is crude, like they're using a basic translation program. Should I put it through? Do it. The main screen flickered, and suddenly Sarah was looking at an alien face. The being had large, gentle eyes and pale blue skin. Its expression was one of desperate hope mixed with confusion. Human ships, the alien said, its voice carrying a melodic quality despite the poor translation. You came. The beacon worked. We are Zilani. We need help. The swarm devours all. Please, you must stop them before... The transmission cut off as an explosion bloomed in the distance. One of the crystal ships had been destroyed, its elegant hull torn apart by weapons that seemed to melt matter itself. Ma'am, called Lieutenant Park urgently, the crystal ships are moving toward us. They appear to be welcoming us. Sarah watched as a formation of the beautiful alien vessels approached her fleet. They weren't displaying any weapons or defensive postures. Instead, they seemed to be arranging themselves in some kind of ceremonial formation. They think we're here for a parade, she realized. They don't understand what kind of help they requested. The Zalani ships continued their approach, transmitting what sounded like greeting songs and friendship declarations. Meanwhile, the dark enemy fleet was methodically destroying everything in the outer system, growing larger with each station and asteroid they consumed. "Admiral," Commander Hayes said slowly, "something's wrong here. The crystal ships, they're not acting like a military force under attack. They're acting like they've never seen real combat," Sarah finished. "Lieutenant Park, what's your tactical assessment?" "Ma'am, the crystal ships have no armor, minimal shields, and weapons that appear to be designed for asteroid mining rather than ship-to-ship combat. They're completely helpless against the enemy fleet." Sarah felt a cold realization settling in her stomach. The aliens who had sent the distress signal weren't warriors. They were civilians, probably scientists or explorers, who had found an ancient military beacon and activated it without understanding what they were doing. "Ma'am," called the communications officer, "we're receiving another transmission from the approaching ships. They're inviting us to some kind of ceremony. They want to formally welcome their guardian protectors with traditional songs and gift exchanges." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. The situation was becoming clear. These peaceful aliens had accidentally sent a military distress signal, and now they thought the human fleet was here for a diplomatic first contact. They had no idea that Task Force Cerberus was designed for one purpose: to destroy threats to human security. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park said urgently, "the enemy fleet is changing course. They're moving toward the welcoming committee. If those crystal ships get any closer to us, they'll be caught in the crossfire." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the tactical display. The enemy ships were indeed moving, attracted by the gathering of vessels around the human fleet. The beautiful alien ships were about to be caught between two forces they couldn't possibly understand. "Ma'am," Commander Hayes added, "our sensors are picking up massive energy signatures from the enemy fleet. Whatever weapons they're using, they're charging them up for a major attack." The moment stretched out like a held breath. The Zalani ships continued their ceremonial approach, broadcasting friendship and gratitude. The enemy fleet closed in like hungry predators, their living hulls pulsing with dark energy, and between them, the human fleet hung in space like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park said quietly, "we need to make a decision. Those crystal ships are sitting ducks, and the enemy will be in weapons range in 3 minutes." Sarah looked at the display showing the approaching Zalani vessels. Their hulls were transparent in places, and she could see aliens inside. Beings with gentle faces and flowing robes, clearly preparing for some kind of welcoming ceremony. They had no idea they were flying into a war zone. "Combat alert," she announced throughout the fleet. "All hands to battle stations." This is not a drill. Klaxons began wailing throughout Task Force Cerberus. Humans ran to their positions with the efficiency of a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. Weapon systems came online, shields activated, and targeting computers began tracking everything in the system. "Ma'am," called the communications officer, "the crystal ships are hailing us again. They're asking if we're experiencing technical difficulties with our greeting protocols." Sarah almost laughed. Here they were, preparing for battle against an enemy that consumed planets, and the aliens were worried about proper diplomatic etiquette. "Lieutenant Park," she ordered, "identify priority targets in the enemy fleet. Commander Hayes, prepare for full engagement. All ships are weapons free." "Ma'am," Hayes said carefully, "what about the crystal ships? They're going to be right in our firing solution." Sarah looked at the tactical display one more time. The Zalani vessels were beautiful, peaceful, and completely defenseless. They represented everything humanity claimed to protect, but they were also in the way of the most dangerous enemy Task Force Cerberus had ever faced. "The mission is to neutralize the threat," she said finally. "All threats. We'll sort out the friendlies afterward." As the human fleet powered up its weapons, Admiral Sarah Chen made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She had come here to save an alien civilization from extinction. But first, she was about to open fire on the very beings she had traveled 12 million light-years to protect. The beautiful crystal ships continued their approach, still broadcasting songs of welcome and gratitude. They had no idea that their salvation was about to become their nightmare. The first salvo from Task Force Cerberus lit up space like a small sun. Kinetic rounds traveling at a significant fraction of light speed slammed into the nearest enemy vessels, while nuclear warheads detonated in brilliant flashes that vaporized everything within their blast radius. The Void Swarm ships, for all their ability to consume matter and energy, had never faced weapons designed by a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing. The elegant biomechanical hulls that could absorb laser fire and deflect energy beams simply shattered when hit by chunks of depleted uranium moving at relativistic speeds. Admiral Sarah Chen watched the battle unfold on her displays with grim satisfaction. Whatever these creatures were, they clearly hadn't evolved to fight humans. "Target their feeding vessels first," she ordered. "Don't let them consume any more material." The human destroyers moved with deadly precision, their crews operating with the calm efficiency of professionals, doing what they had trained for their entire lives. Each ship picked its targets and fired, sending streams of destruction into the enemy formation. But the Zilani were also in that formation. The crystal ships that had come to welcome their saviors were caught in the crossfire. Their beautiful transparent hulls offered no protection against human weapons. Sarah watched in horror as 3 of the elegant vessels simply disintegrated under the impact of stray kinetic rounds. "Cease fire on grid 7 through 12, she shouted, but it was too late. The Zilani ships were scattered like leaves in a hurricane, some destroyed outright, others spinning helplessly with their delicate systems shattered. "Ma'am," called Commander Hayes, "we're receiving emergency transmissions from the crystal ships. They're asking why we're shooting at them." Sarah felt sick to her stomach, but there was no time for regret. The enemy fleet was adapting faster than she had expected. The surviving Void Swarm ships were changing their approach, spreading out and using the debris from destroyed vessels as cover. "All ships, maintain fire discipline," she ordered. "Target only the biomechanical vessels. Avoid the crystal ships if possible." But if possible was becoming increasingly difficult. The enemy had realized that the humans wouldn't fire on the Zilani ships, and they were using the crystalline vessels as shields. Sarah watched one of the swarm ships actually grab a damaged Zilani vessel and hold it in front of its hull like armor. "They're using the aliens as human shields," Lieutenant Park observed. "Then we go through them," Sarah replied coldly. "Launch marine pods. Board the enemy vessels directly." The order sent shockwaves through the fleet. Boarding actions in space were considered suicide missions by most military analysts. But humans had been designed by evolution to thrive in environments that would kill most other species. Within minutes, hundreds of small pods launched from the human carriers. Each pod contained a squad of Marines in powered armor, equipped with weapons and life support systems that could function in the vacuum of space. Captain Maria Santos commanded the lead boarding party. As her pod slammed into the hull of a Void Swarm vessel, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with close combat. The pod-shaped charges blew a hole in the enemy hull, and Santos led her squad into the dark interior of the alien ship. The inside of the swarm vessel was like something from a nightmare. The walls pulsed with organic rhythms, and the air was thick with spores that would have killed any unprotected human in seconds. But Santos and her Marines wore sealed suits and breathed filtered air. "Contact," shouted Sergeant Williams as shapes moved in the darkness ahead. The aliens inside the ship were unlike anything in Earth's databases. They looked like insects crossed with machinery, chitinous plates covering mechanical joints, multiple limbs ending in tools that could serve as both hands and weapons. The firefight that followed was brief and brutal. The swarm creatures were adapted for consuming and converting matter, not for fighting armored soldiers in confined spaces. Human assault rifles loaded with explosive rounds tore through the aliens like paper. But the real shock came when the Marines reached the ship's control center. The beings operating the vessel weren't the insect-like creatures they had been fighting. They were small, gray-skinned humanoids with large eyes, connected to the ship's systems by organic cables that grew directly from their spines. "Jesus," whispered Santos. "They're prisoners. The ship is using them as living computers." The discovery changed everything. The Void Swarm wasn't just consuming matter. They were enslaving the crews of every ship they captured, turning them into biological components of their fleet. Santos quickly set demolition charges throughout the ship's vital systems, while her medic tried to free the enslaved beings. But the organic cables were too deeply integrated. Removing them would kill the prisoners instantly. "Captain," her medic reported, "these beings have been here for months, maybe years. The ship's systems have completely integrated with their nervous systems. There's no way to save them. Santos looked at the trapped aliens, beings who might have once been explorers or traders, now reduced to living navigation computers. She made the hardest decision of her military career. Set the charges for a 10-second delay, she ordered. We're giving them the only mercy we can. All across the enemy fleet, similar scenes played out. Human Marines boarded swarm vessels, fighting through corridors that seemed to breathe and pulse around them. They discovered cargo holds full of consumed matter from dozens of different worlds, engine rooms powered by the life force of enslaved crews, and command centers where beings from multiple species had been turned into organic components. The humans fought with a fury that surprised even themselves. This wasn't just a military operation anymore. It was a rescue mission, and a mercy killing rolled into one. Back on the Prometheus, Admiral Chen watched the battle statistics scroll across her screens. The human fleet was winning, but the cost was becoming clear. Every swarm vessel they boarded revealed more horrors. More enslaved crews, more consumed worlds, more evidence of an enemy that didn't just kill its victims but perverted them into tools of further destruction. "Ma'am," reported Commander Hayes, "we're receiving transmissions from the planet's surface. The remaining Zilani they're begging us to stop." Sarah looked at the communications display. The gentle aliens were broadcasting in dozens of languages, pleading with the humans to cease their attack. They still didn't understand that this was a rescue operation. They think we're as bad as the swarm, she realized, and from their perspective she supposed they were right. The Zilani had watched their beautiful, welcoming fleet get torn apart by human weapons. They had seen Marines in powered armor boarding ships and setting off explosions. To beings who had never witnessed real warfare, the humans probably looked like demons. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park announced, "enemy fleet is down to 30% strength. Recommend we press the attack." Sarah nodded, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. They were winning the battle, but they were losing something else: the trust and gratitude of the people they had come to save. "Continue the assault," she ordered, "and send a message to the planet's surface. Tell them we're here to help even if they can't see it yet." The battle raged on, with human ships methodically destroying every swarm vessel in the system. The Marines continued their boarding actions, finding and mercy-killing thousands of enslaved beings from dozens of different species. Each discovery made the humans more determined to wipe out every trace of the Void Swarm. But on the planet below, the Zilani huddled in their crystal cities and watched the sky burn. They had called for guardians and received destroyers. They had asked for salvation and gotten conquerors who solved every problem with overwhelming violence. The humans fought with the desperate fury of a species that had crawled up from a death world by being more dangerous than anything else in their environment. They brought to this gentle system all the accumulated violence of a billion years of evolution, and when the last swarm vessel exploded in a nuclear fireball, the humans turned their attention to the planet below, where a terrified civilization waited to learn what their rescue would actually cost them. The silence that followed the battle was more terrifying than the gunfire had been. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, looking down at the blue-green world below. The planet's surface was dotted with crystal cities that gleamed like jewels in the light of the twin suns, but there was no joy in their beauty anymore. "Final casualty report," she requested. Commander Hayes consulted his tablet with a grim expression. "Complete destruction of the Void Swarm fleet. No human casualties in the ship-to-ship engagement. Marine losses were minimal. 12 KIA, 37 wounded. We estimate we destroyed 43 enemy vessels and freed approximately 15,000 enslaved beings." "Freed," Sarah repeated bitterly. "We killed them, Commander. Let's be honest about what we did. Ma'am, they were already dead in every way that mattered. We just gave them peace." Sarah knew he was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier to live with. The Marines had discovered horrors beyond imagination aboard the swarm vessels. Beings from dozens of species, all converted into living components of the enemy fleet. The humans had shown them the only mercy possible. "What about the Zilani losses?" she asked. Hayes hesitated. 17 of their vessels were destroyed in the crossfire. Estimated crew losses around 800 individuals. The remaining ships have withdrawn to the far side of the planet. 800 dead. 800 beings who had come to welcome their saviors and died because humans solved problems with overwhelming violence. "Ma'am," called the communications officer, We're receiving a transmission from the planet surface. It's from someone calling himself Admiral Kethron of the Zilani Defense Coordination. Put it through. The main screen flickered, and Sarah found herself looking at an elderly Zilani with silver skin and eyes that held a mixture of fear and resignation. When the alien spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Human Admiral," he began. "I am Kethron. I speak for what remains of our civilization. We thank you for destroying the Void Swarm. Our worlds are safe because of your intervention." Sarah waited for the but she could hear coming. "However," Kethron continued, "we must discuss the terms of your occupation of our system." "Occupation?" Sarah frowned. "Admiral Kethron, we're here to help, not to occupy." The Zilani's expression didn't change. "Admiral Chen, in the past 72 hours, your fleet has destroyed our welcoming delegation, established orbital supremacy over our homeworld, and deployed armed forces throughout our system. Your ships are scanning our cities, our defenses, and our resources. If this is not an occupation, what would you call it?" Sarah felt a cold realization settle in her stomach. From the Zilani perspective, that was exactly what the human fleet had done. Task Force Cerberus was currently in complete control of the system, with enough firepower to level every city on the planet below. "Admiral," she said carefully, "we responded to your distress signal. We came here to help you against the Void Swarm." "Yes," Kethron agreed. "And you succeeded. The swarm is destroyed. So when will you be leaving?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They had come here to save an alien civilization, but now they were being asked to leave like unwanted guests. "Sir," she said slowly, "we can't leave. Not yet. Our ships used all their fuel reserves getting here. We need time to establish refueling operations, to repair battle damage, to set up a permanent base," Kethron finished. "Admiral Chen, we understand the situation. You cannot return to your home galaxy. You need our resources to survive. The question is, what will this cost us?" Sarah felt like she had been punched in the gut. The old Zilani understood perfectly. The human fleet was stranded in alien space, dependent on Zilani resources for survival, and everyone in the system knew that humans solved their problems through force. "Admiral Kethron," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "humanity has no desire to conquer or exploit your people. We simply need—" "Now you need everything," Kethron interrupted. "Food, fuel, raw materials, manufacturing facilities. You need a base of operations in our system. You need our cooperation to survive. And we need your protection against future threats." He paused, his large eyes studying her through the transmission. "The mathematics of the situation are quite clear." Sarah wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Everything the Zilani Admiral said was true. Task Force Cerberus was stranded in their system with no way home. The humans would need Zilani resources to survive, and they had the firepower to take whatever they needed. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "A treaty," Kethron replied. "A formal agreement between our species. You provide military protection for our worlds. We provide the resources you need to maintain your fleet. Everyone benefits from the arrangement." Sarah studied the alien's face on the screen. There was no anger there, no accusation. Just the weary acceptance of someone who understood how power worked in the universe. "And if we refuse this treaty?" she asked. Kethron's expression didn't change. "Then you take what you need anyway, and we pretend we have a choice in the matter. Admiral, your species may be new to interstellar politics, but the fundamental rules are ancient. The strong take what they need. The weak adapt or die." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Sarah realized that this conversation was being monitored by both fleets, human and Zilani. Everyone was waiting to see how this would play out. "What terms are you offering?" she asked finally. "Joint administration of the system's resources. Human military command with Zilani civilian oversight. Your people get what they need to survive. Our people get protection from future threats. And we all pretend this is a partnership instead of a protection racket." Sarah closed her eyes. This wasn't how first contact was supposed to work. Humanity was supposed to be welcomed into a galactic community of peaceful civilizations. Instead, they had become the neighborhood bullies, the ones everyone feared but pretended to respect. "There is one more thing," Kethron added quietly. "Our scientists have been studying the Void Swarm technology you captured. These creatures were not native to our galaxy. They came from somewhere else, somewhere distant. And if they could travel between galaxies?" He let the implication hang in the air. There could be more of them. Sarah finished. Yes, which means our galaxy will need protectors. Guardians who can fight threats that our peaceful civilizations cannot handle. Kethron's voice took on a bitter edge. It seems the ancient beacon worked exactly as intended. It summoned warriors to defend the galaxy. It just didn't mention that the Guardians would be as dangerous as the threats they fight. Sarah looked out at the crystal cities gleaming on the planet below. Beautiful, peaceful, and now under the protection of a species that had evolved to be the most dangerous thing in their environment. I'll need to discuss this with my command staff, she said. Of course, Kethron replied. But Admiral, please understand, this conversation is a courtesy. The treaty I described will happen whether we formalize it or not. The only question is whether we maintain the illusion of choice. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the weight of what humanity had become. They had answered a distress call and saved an alien civilization from extinction. In return, they had become the new threat that civilization would have to live with. Outside the viewports, the human fleet hung in space like a sword over the peaceful world below. The Zilani had asked for guardians and received conquerors. They had called for salvation and gotten protectors who ruled through fear. Task Force Cerberus had accomplished its mission. The Void Swarm was destroyed and the Zilani were safe. But safety, Sarah realized, came in many forms. And sometimes the cure really was worse than the disease. The galaxy was under new management now. Human management. Whether anyone wanted it or not,